Hello, Rafal. It's very nice to have you here, and thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So, I'd like to start with a few words of introduction. So, if you can tell us what you are doing on a daily basis and who you are in general.
So my name is Rafal, or people just call me Raf, and I work as a career and leadership coach. And I always say that I help people navigate their everyday life and really help them work, lead, and live better. I work mainly virtually with people across the globe in different industries. And I came to this place after working for more than 15 years in training development or people development functions in large organizations in the world. And yes, I was born in Poland. I grew up in Poland, and then I moved to the UK, where I spent around 8 years, and then I moved to Switzerland in 2017, and I live here.
First topic that I would like to cover in our today's conversation is about your past experience as a developer of learning programs. So would you like to tell a little bit more about your role in that area and about your greatest achievement?
So I actually started as a teacher many years ago when I was 19, so ages ago. And then when I moved to the corporate world, I started from a very junior position, which was called a training analyst. And then I progressed throughout levels of company hierarchy. And it meant from the very beginning, it was designing and delivering training. And it was various training, whether it's soft skills or technical skills. And then gradually building more complex training programs, managing training programs, then managing training teams, and finally managing training functions and departments. So the shift is from more of an operational aspect and really delivering training and designing more towards really creating a training strategy, managing the whole execution and implementation. But to be honest, in all my roles, even the most senior one that I had, I always kept this element of designing and facilitating and delivering training, and because I simply liked it, and it gave me this really close contact with the people who would benefit. And so it's a more of a typical life cycle of a training person in the company, from more junior to more senior, and then the shift is usually between the operational and more strategic element of that role. And when you ask me about my biggest professional achievement, it's I think it's definitely my project for Barclays, so one of the largest banks in the world. And there I was responsible for a training program for around 180,000 employees globally. And it was a large project for compliance training. So it's a sensitive, high pressure regulatory training. And it was a very complex, very challenging, very stressful project, but it landed successfully. It taught me a lot. I met a lot of amazing people, and it's definitely one of the biggest achievements on my CV, so to say.
I'd like to know your opinion about the development programs in big companies, because right now they are investing a lot of money in that. And do you think that they are taking the right direction, or there are some changes needed?
I think the answer is yes and no. So I see change, but not everywhere. And I think what we often think is that when we look about people development, we always think about the formal training, as we would say. So training programs and, usually either e-learning or some classroom training, so-called, or in-person training. But in reality, I think, first of all, we need to think and really remember that people development has a lot of aspects. So all of us who work, when we think about our own development, we may have slightly different definition, right? So it's about gaining new skills and knowledge. And a lot of that really happens not in a formal environment, but it really happens through interacting with others, being involved in certain projects, having a mentor, having a sponsor in the company. And I think the big drive is actually that companies really realize that people want to be developed, right? So people don't stay in a job for many years because they don't see the growth, right? So they ask for development options. And again, for some people, it will be training. For some people, it would be a new project or a move to the different department. And I think a lot of companies realize that, first of all, the learning or the development should be, as we say, people-centric. So it will be really focused on what people want. And as you said, it just makes sense from a financial perspective to really keep the best people that you have and to grow the people that you have in the company, rather than just replacing them and hiring new people and retraining them and training them. So I can see the trend in I would say the what. So what we really see and understand as training, and what we really offer as training to people, and then how. So how it is really developed and how it's really offered. And I see more and more companies moving into a digital space. They are much more flexible, and there's this trend to internal mobility, which allows you to move between the teams and functions and gain skills and knowledge. And I see more and more companies actually follow that. And maybe even those larger companies I can see are more and more interested in exploring those options and seeing how they work.
There might be a situation that there will be a group of people who wouldn't like to upskill themselves. So how to work with that resistance?
Well, one thing is to really understand what people really want, right? And as you said, some people will not want to learn, but by this they will not want to, for example, have more responsibilities or maybe get promoted because they are happy where they are, right? And that's fine. And I would always say respect people's choice, right? It is a choice. The difference would be when I see and when we see that maybe because of the changes in technology processes or just the way we operate, these people really need to learn some things to do their job. So there's always a difference between learning to perform and learning as a development. If I work and I don't know how to use certain tools, let's say, I don't know, Excel, right? And it's needed for my work, then the learning really is I don't say an obligation, but it's really necessary for me to do my job. But once this person knows the Excel and they don't maybe want to, develop into data analysts, right? So really understanding what people want, what people define as their development. If there are people who don't want to learn, don't want to grow, really respecting this choice and having this ongoing conversation around their performance and their development and seeing if maybe their mind changes at some point.
I think that this is very valuable what you are saying about the employee development, but there is also one additional aspect, which is the annual performance review. So a lot of companies actually have something like that at the end of every year there is a review of employee achievements and development. So what do you think about this approach?
Well, it's a sensitive subject, and you see a lot of companies moving away from the annual performance reviews. And then you see for a lot of people, they just say it's a process and it doesn't mean anything. So it's just ticking the box exercise, right? So when we take away this transactional aspect of the performance review, whether we do it in the system, whatever we do, for me, it's more about the conversation between you as a manager and me as an employee, and really looking at those two things: how I perform versus the expectations, right? And what about my career development? So when you have a conversation with me as a manager, first of all, we would like to see what's my performance, right? Do I perform my tasks? Am I performing, overperforming, underperforming? And really focusing first of all on this, because that's what I was hired to do, and that's my key focus, right? If I perform and there's no problem with my performance, then the second question would be, what about career development? Do you want to grow? Do I want to grow as an employee, right? And what I see as a career development. And that's a completely different conversation, because if you're a boss and then I tell you, I'm fine, I'm doing my job, I'm great at this, and I don't want any more growth, right? Because, I just want to go home and focus on other things. We as managers should respect it, right? And that is my approach. That has always been my approach, because I wouldn't be able to force my team to have a career development if they don't want to do it, right? But if someone is ambitious and if someone wants to do something, then our job as a manager is to find a way to support them in this.
When it comes to your personal development, what did you learn during that 15 years of working in that area? Would you like to give any advices about the personal development, which we can use?
To be honest, I don't think I can sort of, as in English you say, I can't dish the advice, because I think it's, I still probably, I'm not the most experienced in terms of, and not the best placed person to give advice. But what I would say from my personal experience is that I would just think hard, and maybe not hard, but think about more about what development really means for you, right? So think about yourself. I do this exercise with my clients. We're meeting in 3 years' time, and you tell me, wow, my life is amazing, right? And focus on where would you like to be in 3 years' time? What does it mean for you in terms of, do I need to have new skills? Do I need to learn something? Do I want to have new experience? And then working backwards, think about where can I get this, right? So just be egoist, to be honest. Even if you work in a company, you're still an individual, right? And then if you do certain job, think about this. Do I know everything about this? Do I need to know more? Do I want to know more? So it's a lot of self-reflection. And then once you have a clarity about some of those things, trying to see where you can find those development options. That's how I always operated, and that's how I always encourage my teams to operate, because otherwise it's just me forcing people to do things that they may not necessarily want. So even if I spend $1 million on training, which they hate, let's be honest, I don't think they will use any skills afterwards.
That's totally right, and aligned with this what we are saying. And I really see that you are enjoy this area of knowledge. So why did you decide to move away from that and change your profession to something different? Maybe not totally different, but still something different.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for saying that. I mean, I have always been passionate about helping people grow, right? So teaching people. I started as a teacher when I was 20 years old, right? So, and for me, the idea of helping others to gain knowledge and really change their life, it's really amazing. And it's very rewarding when you help people gain new skills and will become different people and become better versions of themselves. But what I realized over this last 15 years in the corporate world is that I have less and less real impact, and I don't really see the kind of, the impact that I would hope I would have on people that participate in the training that I come up with and I create. And I was more and more detached from the corporate life as well. It didn't really give me the joy and the sense of fulfillment that probably I had when I started many years ago. So gradually I became less excited about work. And then when I moved to Switzerland and I got a really good job, I quickly realized that A, this is not the job I want to do. B, really my body at some point told me that I think you had enough. And unfortunately, after a certain period of time, I just had a burnout, and that kind of forced my life into pause. And then after a few months, it made me reflect on what I want to do, and a natural thing for me to just focus on helping people on a very tangible in one-to-one basis. And that's how I got into coaching.
You mentioned about the burnout, and I think that this is very important topic these days. So in your opinion, what was the main reason that caused it?
I think one of the questions you ask about the burnout in terms of contributors, and I think it's a big question. And so for me, and I think each of us who unfortunately goes through this and may go through this experience will look at our experience in a very individual way, and that's how I look at it at mine as well. And for me, it was a combination of few things. So I mentioned earlier that I wasn't really enjoying my job anymore at some point, and I moved to a really much bigger role here in Switzerland, and I ended up in a place that not really was very nurturing, and I was quite new, and I wanted to just prove I'm worth it. So I was working hard. There were some issues with the job itself, but also for me, the big change of, moving countries, moving jobs, completely new reality. And I think that kind of was a trigger for what probably would happen later normally, that I just, that my body just gave up. And one day I just woke up and I just couldn't continue, which was both liberating because, well, I couldn't continue, but it was quite scary experience as well. And that's how it kind of ended my Cinderella run, as I say, right? And anything that happened afterwards was just recovering, finding a new kind of lease of life. But yeah, in terms of factors, for me, it was a combination of few things.
Do you think, looking from the time perspective, that you could do something different to prevent that?
I think thinking of my experience, obviously now I'm much wiser. I would say, oh, I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that, right? But I think it's just wishful thinking. Well, in my case, it was at least. And I think it's important to just recognize symptoms that start appearing and some things that happen that point clearly that there's something is not right. And then I didn't do anything about them because, well, yeah, for various reasons I had to go on. But if anyone who is watching this can see any of those symptoms, and I'm not a professional, so I always encourage people to do some reading on the professional websites or sources, and psychology and occupational psychology. When you see any of those red flags that tell you that your body or your mind is not helping, it's not coping very well with the amount of work and stress you under, then it's definitely time to do something about this. And it's either you can do something about this, or if you're not able, just ask and speak with a specialist, with an expert, right? So answering your question now, I hope I would do something if it happens again. But again, I can't guarantee this. So that's why I always say, think about where you are. And then if you see something is wrong, just speak up and really ask for help.
In addition to that, would you like to share how your recovery process looked like?
It's a very personal thing. So I remember when I stopped working and I had burnout, I wanted to fix myself very quickly. And for me, it was really annoying that, the next week I couldn't just be my old self, right? Full of energy, and my body would be full of energy and I was motivated. It just didn't work like that, which was at the beginning for me very frustrating because it was like a vicious circle. Okay, I'm doing all sorts of things like lots of walks, physical exercise, eating well, and it's not working. And then after some time, I just realized I need to let go and give up, and just spent a few months well, in reality, not focusing on getting better, right? And just doing things that I enjoy. And I remember also I started working with a coach. I started doing things that I like, so running, cooking, I don't know, annoying my partner. And then gradually, I think once I gave up the idea that I will be fixed in a month's time, it just became easier. I remember then I tried to find a book that would help me, and I found a book called The Joy of Burnout. And I remember my first thought was like, what the hell? What a stupid title that is, right? And only now, after a few years, I can say that there is something like that you discover that happens for a reason. And once I had this epiphany moment and I worked with my coach, I realized, okay, now I can change my life and do something else. I don't need to just focus on what's lost. And one important thing is that when I did a lot of reading, when it was happening, something that really struck me was that there was a psychologist who said that in a burnout, the big process of recovery is grieving. So we grieve because we lost the life that we had before, which would never come back. And that was very powerful because I realized that that's what's happening to me. I was hoping I would go back to the life I had, but it's impossible. So once you go through the grieving process of that, then it becomes easier for you to really visualize what life you want to have afterwards.
I know that you're not a psychologist or any specialist in that, as you said, but is there any way that we can prevent that?
I think it's a very complex question. I remember last year I read the article that remember that burnout is not an individual thing or phenomenon, it's an organizational phenomenon. So, but when you ask me about, is there anything we can do to prevent? I mean, as a boss and as an employee, let's put it like this, right? So as an organization, we have responsibility and duty of care for our people well-being. And we see this now more and more that companies, well, they publish things like a week off to recharge, right? But in general, it's really being mindful of what kind of pressure directly or indirectly, we actually put on our teams and employees and really being reasonable with the workload. I know it's easier said than done. But you as an employee, I think the first thing is if you notice that in any way the stress of work impacts the way you live beyond, let's say, the reasonable threshold. So if it impacts the way you sleep, the way you eat, the way you interact with others, your social life, your family life, the first signal that it actually does impact you, I think that's a moment to really do something about this. And then, as I said, find a specialist, find a professional resource and read about this and get some tricks and tips to manage that, right? To see how you can prevent this worsening. But yeah, that's probably the basic advice I would have. If you notice that this impacts your life in any way, which makes you uncomfortable or impacts your physical well-being, mental well-being, it's absolutely the right time to do something about this and to do the first step at least to read and learn more about this.
It's great to hear that you recover from that, and I think that your story might be very helpful for others. And right now you are working as a coach. So would you like to share how did you start your journey as a coach? And there was any formal training or you tried to learn from others?
It's actually, if I wanted to make a joke and say, I woke up one day and I said, I'm a coach, I'm going to put it in my business card. But actually, funny enough, I did my first coach training in 2014 when I lived in London. And at that time, I didn't think it's going to be my job ever. I just did it out of curiosity. So when I realized in 2017 and 18 that I would like to do it professionally, then I decided to go for training. So in my case, I did, now more than 100 hours of training, a formal training. And what was important for me is to, first of all, find a training that is approved and accredited by the International Coach Federation, so has some quality behind this. And it really is also aligned to a bit of my philosophy and the way I live and think, because I wanted to be a coach who would be very authentic. So I would not like to apply techniques of coaching, let's say, that I don't really believe in, right? So I did the coach training 2014, then 2019, 2020, and I'm still in the coach training. And that's how it started from a, let's say, educational training perspective. And then I started coaching, so practicing.
In every profession, there are some skills required, and I assume that the same is in coaching. So what kind of skills are required to be a good coach and how we can train them?
Yes, I think there are two basic skills. One is to have really well-developed, deep, active listening skills. And the second basic skill is to have a very well-developed ability to ask transformational, powerful questions. And these are the two basic ones. Obviously, there are many more skills, like being able to create a sense of comfort, build trust, and keep integrity in the session. But without those first two ones, so active listening and asking the powerful questions, well, I don't think you would be a great coach. That's just my personal opinion.
I'm just thinking, is there is something that can make you a better listener and better, I don't know if there is that word asker, but the person who is asking the right question. Do you think, and can you suggest something that can make someone a better person in those two areas?
When you talk with people, do you focus on really listening to what they say, or do we really focus on what we want to say next or ask? And that's usually the basic thing. We don't talk to communicate, we talk to exchange information, right? So the first thing, and this is what you do, at least what I did when I started coach training, is really work hard on listening skills. So switching off completely when I'm in the moment with someone and really focusing on what they say, what they tell me, right? So the simple first exercise for all of us would be to start listening immediately when you have another conversation. Stop thinking about the next question you want to ask, but really listen to what they tell you, what the story is, and even pick the words that they use and try to be fully present with what they say. It's super hard for most of us because we're not used to doing this. So that's for listening. And for asking the right questions, that comes, I would say, second, right? Because we can only ask the right and powerful questions when we really hear what the person is saying, really, right? So you don't want to ask the question you want to ask, but you want to ask the question that will help the person who is in front of you will discover something or make them pause and think and change the way they think and look at things. So practicing that really is about listening, getting the important information from the other person, and asking the question that will make them go, that's a really good question.
What about the challenges? Because I think that coaching as a job is very challenging profession. So would you like to share your challenges in your daily job?
I think probably when you asked me, I thought that the biggest challenge is when you feel stuck. So when we say that we're stuck, it means that we are not able to help the client, and the client seems stuck where they are. And obviously that's a challenge because it means that you're not helpful. And it means that maybe you're not the right person for this person. You're not the right coach. Or maybe you need to find some other way to help them get unstuck, right? So it's a difficult but useful challenge because we go through supervision and peer coaching as well. So if I ever get a place where I feel I'm stuck, I can always talk to my mentor, coach, supervisor, and see if there's something that I need to do differently, or maybe there's something I missed, or maybe there's something else I can learn and apply it in this situation, right? So that's a typical challenge. And in a broader sense, the challenge is obviously when you realize you're not able to help. You tried things, you went for supervision, you tried different approaches, but you reach the point when you say, okay, I think our journey here is finished. And it's about really being honest with the client and say, well, I don't think I'm the right person anymore for you. You may want to have a different coach, right? So I think these would be the biggest challenges that I can think of immediately.
Regarding the clients, you mentioned that there might be a case that you cannot help someone. So what next? Do you suggest different coach, or is there any way to help that person?
I think both. So sometimes you realize that you're not able to help. In my case, for example, someone needed a coach who specializes in completely different area of life. And it was just a matter of saying, well, I think this is all I can do for you. I think you want to work someone who's much more experienced in this particular area of your interest, right? So you have this conversation, and then the client, at the end of the day, the client always decides whether they want to work with you still or not, right? Sometimes there is a mismatch in terms of personality and the working style, the coaching style, but that usually appears quite early on in the journey, and then the client usually is brave enough to just say, I don't think it's working, and they just change the client. And one of the other situations is that when you realize that the client really needs a psychologist or potentially even more specialized intervention, so then it's obviously important to communicate with the client that, coaching is not the right approach for them at this time, not the right treatment, so to say, because it's not treatment. And they should probably speak with a person who specializes in their area of concern.
From the perspective of the person who has never worked as a coach and don't know how that job looks like, do you think that this is a case that every client comes with some kind of expectation? And what kind of clients in general do you have?
The first question, I think that not everyone comes with certain expectations. Yes, a lot of clients, and maybe majority of those that I work with, come with expectations, and I always ask them about those expectations. what would you expect from the work with me? What is your expectation of the process, right? What is your objective of the process? So that it's clear that we are both aligned, that I know that I can actually help them and work with them. And there are people who, for example, book session with me, especially in a pro bono environment. They say, well, I've never worked with a coach. I don't really know what it means. Can you help me, right? Can you educate me how you can actually help me? So it's more than you explain what coaching really is and what I can do for them. And then they just go away and think, is it something I want to use? And then they either come with some expectations. Yes, I want you to help me with ABC. Or they say, well, no, not really. It's not something for me. So those two groups in the work that I focus on, I would say in my case, it's the majority of those that have expectations. And there are some clients who don't, and we just help them. And sometimes it also translates into the session. So I always ask the client in each session, what would be a useful session for you today? So again, there's this reconfirming of their expectations even for a single session.
What do you think about the situation in the coaching industry? Because I know that this industry is regulated, but there are many people who has a coach in the title.
Very political subject, but I will say, first of all, so yes, it's a market that it's huge and it's growing. And as you've noticed, a lot of people have coach in their job title or their website descriptions. And legally, coaching is not regulated. So we don't see any market in the world where the job of a coach would be legally defined, like with a psychologist, for example. So there are no legal requirements for you to become a coach. Having said that, as you mentioned, there is something which we call a self-regulation. So there are few governing bodies across the world, and I know two of them for sure. And so it's an European Mentoring and Coaching Council and an International Coaching Federation. So I use those two examples because they are large organizations where to become a member, you need to go through certain certification accreditation process, which means that the coach who is accredited by either of those bodies has certain number of coach training, certain number of coaching practice, and a regular supervision, mentoring, and also is bound by code of ethics. So it means that if you decide to use the service of a coach who is accredited, at least you have a certain information about the training and the experience and the ethical standards that they are bound by. But as you asked me about the market, I would say that I hope that the market will regulate. Maybe that's not that the clients will actually and the quality will prevail. So, like with every service, I always believe that if the service is good and the clients see the value of the service, they will stick with those who actually offer the good service, right? So I hope that those who may not offer the great service, who may probably offer something that is of a lower quality, at some point they will be naturally eliminated from the market. And that's just my hope, to be honest.
There are some standards from these regulators, I would say, but do you think that there is something which can be called as a style of coaching or your own style of coaching? And do you think that you have your own style of coaching?
Three questions. First of all, yes, there are standards, and the example is the standard is, for example, that a coach builds trust and builds a safe space with a client, right? The coaching style is something less standardized. It's just about how I coach, how I create experience in the session with a client, how I bring who I am into the session. So yes, my coaching knowledge, my coach training, but also my sense of humor, my life experience, my professional experience, my personality, and my style of asking questions, right? I do have a coaching style, definitely, and that's not something I just decided to have, but that's something that actually a lot of my clients and my mentors just made me realize and helped me realize that, for example, I'm a very visual person. So working with me usually involves a lot of images and descriptions and working with the idea of shapes and forms. And also I have a peculiar sense of humor, which very often comes in the session as well. Because at the end of the day, it's a conversation of two human beings. And I realize that it helps my clients really process some of the information that they have. I'm sure it's going to evolve the older I get and the more coaching practice I have. But so far, it's been serving me well. But I know it's also very distinct. So that's why it's also one of the factors people use to determine whether they want to work with me or not.
One thing that you like the most in that job?
That every session is a unique experience when you get to change people's lives.
I'd like to present you the statements about the coaching. Maybe majority of them are not true, but would you like to share your opinion? The first one is that coaches are amateurs.
Yes, some not. And those who are not amateurs, they are professionally trained, certified, with lots of practice and supervision. So the choice is yours, which coaches you will choose.
The second one is that coaching is just for the people who has a problems, not for successful people.
Coaching is about growing. It's about overcoming your obstacles and really unlocking your full potential. And I believe that even the most successful people need to be challenged and really continue growing.
How long does it take to see the effect of the coaching?
Sometimes just a single session can really have a huge impact. So it really depends on what the client is really facing.
And my favorite one, will a coach tell me how to do my job?
Hopefully not, because that's not the coach's job. So coach will help you figure out how to do your job.
To be able to help me, the coach should have the same background as me.
The coach shouldn't be the expert in the field that you're in. The coach should be an expert in asking you the questions that make you, oh, wow, okay, and challenge the way you look at things and really think and unpack some of those things in a way that you haven't done before.
And what about the costs? Many people are saying that coaching is very expensive.
Great quality and results come with a higher price.
What about the risk? In that sense that isn't it risky to be open up to talk with the coach and to be open with the problems? So
I would say that from a perspective of a coach who is a ICF accredited coach, obviously there is a skill and its requirement, to be honest, that the coach is able to build trust with you. So you should trust your coach. But on a more transactional level, everyone who is an ICF approved coach is bound by code of ethics, which includes client confidentiality. And I always sign the contract also with my clients, which stipulates clearly that anything that we share between us is really confidential and stays between us unless, and there are some legal provisions for that. So I would say, if you want to feel safer, ask the coach to sign agreement with you and ensure there is a confidentiality clause. On a separate note, if you don't trust your coach, then I would say, well, reconsider your choice of a coach.
Coaching is a tool or technique?
Both. It's both. For me, coaching questions can be a tool and can be a technique, and you can use them, for example, as a manager in your performance review conversations. But coaching in general is, for me, is a process, right? So it's a relationship between me and the client. It's a kind of journey, as we say, and it helps them move from A to B.
Anyone can coach, it's just asking a few questions.
So I would say if anyone can be a coach, try it. I really encourage you. Go out and coach someone. And on a serious note, obviously, it's about asking the right, powerful questions that, as I said earlier, that make you, as a client, really reflect and really tap into your full potential and really make you go, I've never thought about this. I've never thought about this like that. Oh, that's a good question. I need to think about it. So it's about asking the right, powerful questions.
And related to the previous one, that coaches aren't well trained because the industry is not regulated.
So yeah, as I said a moment ago, so yes, some coaches are not trained. So I would recommend finding a coach who is trained. And as I said, there are ways to do some due diligence and research and find a coach who you see has been trained, ideally by the accredited body, has enough training hours. Usually I would encourage at least 70 hours of training, ideally more than 100, has a lot of coaching practice, again, minimum 100 of hours, and is qualified and trained and, for example, passed the exam. So in ICF, you have to pass an exam around coaching, ethics, standards. So do your due diligence, find a coach that has been trained, and that's my advice.
And the last one, that coaches are armchair psychologists.
Some coaches are trained psychologists, so they can be armchair psychologists, and some aren't. I'm not a psychologist. But for me, there's a clear distinction between a psychologist and a coach, and it's very important that those boundaries are never crossed. So because obviously psychologists and coaches use completely different frameworks and objectives. So if you notice that someone behaves like an armchair psychologist, I would honestly reconsider your choice of a coach.
I read in your bio that you are also the designer and facilitator of diversity and inclusion initiatives. What does it mean? And if you would like to talk a little bit more about this topic.
Yeah, so that's something I have been passionate for a while now, to help build the organizations and cultures where everyone feels they belong. So for me, this is what I do. I work as a speaker or a trainer, designing and delivering workshops around the aspect of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and really helping organizations improve certain aspects. So depending on the client requirement, for example, last Thursday, I designed and delivered actually on Thursday a workshop around building trust and helping to foster authenticity and visibility because of the Pride Month. So the focus one was around creating the environment where people can feel they can actually be true to who they are. Sometimes the workshop is around specific aspects of what diversity and inclusion really means and how to create the space where, as I say, you invite a lot of people who are very different to your meeting or to the table, and then you make sure that all of them really feel they can play part in the meeting, right? So depending on the client requirement, it will be different aspects of the concept of making sure that we are open, we include people who are very different and very diverse, and we actually make them feel they belong, they can contribute to the project, the work, to the company, or to the life that we create.
What do you think about the what everyone can do in that area? Is there any way that everyone can contribute to diversity in the place where we are living?
Of course, because I think at the end of the day, we need to remember that we are all very different, but we are the same. So we are all human beings, but we are all very, very different. So whenever I run the workshop, I always think how to encourage people who can actually make the smallest gesture on a daily basis. And I always say, just be curious about others and be curious, about who they are and what they bring and what their story really is, and really accept that people are different, right? So to not base your opinions on reading, just get to know the other person, and use smallest opportunities to really interact with others and ask them, well, what's your story? And what do you like? Who are you? But really basic, it doesn't have to be a grand gesture, right? We don't have to change the world, but we can start with a simple gesture of really being curious about the other human being and getting to know them as they are and who they are. And that really is a very powerful thing to do, because first of all, it will let them know that we see them. And second of all, it will probably educate us a bit more about things that we potentially were never aware.
And given the fact that you lived in London, right now in Zurich, but you are from Poland, what do you think in general about the situation, or maybe the level of awareness about the diversity and inclusion in these three countries?
Definitely there are. Probably I wouldn't like to say a lot about, for example, Poland, because I left 11 years ago. I don't live there anymore. I don't have a daily contact with my fellow Poles, right? But I mean, in general, I would say we all still have work to do, because even when you look at what's happening around, we're still not very, I would say we're not there where we need to be, where everyone can feel they can just be their true authentic selves. And we feel really inclusive in the way we do business, and we encourage business opportunities. Obviously, my experience with UK and Switzerland, UK, well, London, that's probably worth saying. London is very diverse, and the whole concept of inclusion in the Anglo-Saxon probably culture is, I don't say much more advanced, but because of the legal developments and because of the big cultural change in the corporate world, it has really been a focal point for a lot of business initiatives. So I would say they are probably a step ahead of some other countries. But I think, yeah, as I said, we are slower and faster moving towards the right direction. But I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of educating all of us to really become much more inclusive and helping others belong.
Thanks, Rafał, for sharing your experience, and I think that this conversation will be very useful for many people. So thanks again for your time, and speak to you soon.
Thank you, David, for having me, and yeah, hope to speak to you soon.